The Unabomber, an American domestic terrorist, a former mathematics professor, a man who abandoned his career in 1969 in order to pursue a primitive lifestyle. He is responsible for killing 3 people aged 23. A man who wanted to start a revolution, a man who believed that everyone lived life the wrong way and that they should live it the way he believed. This is the story of Ted Kaczynski. We start with his childhood. Born on May 22, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, his family were working class Polish Americans. From an early age, Ted suffered from hives, basically a very bad skin rash. It led to him being forced into hospital isolation. He hardly interacted with anyone during this time, and after this ordeal finished, he went months showing hardly any emotion. This experience led to him showing sympathy to wild animals and animals in cages. During 1st and 4th grade, he was described as a healthy and well-adjusted young man. His family moved to Evergreen Park, Illinois, and after scoring 167 in an IQ test, he skipped 6th grade. Ted himself described this as a pivotal event in the change of him, as he was bullied by the older children. I can't help but feel sorry for him here. I believe it's very important that in school, kids are kept with people their own age. It was always going to be a very difficult task, no matter how clever you are, no matter how great your IQ is. Ted was described as a loner, an old man before his time. Another said he'd never known anyone with a brain like he had. His mother called Ted as a shy child, who had become unresponsive if pressured into a social situation. At one point, she was so worried about Ted's social development that she considered entering him into a study for autistic children led by Bruno Beltenheim. She decided against it after observing Beltenheim's abrupt and cold manner. Kaczynski attended Evergreen Park Community High School, where he excelled academically. He played the trombone in the marching band and was a member of the mathematics, biology, coin and German clubs, but was regarded as an outsider by his classmates. In 1996, a former classmate said, "He was never really seen as a person, as an individual personality. He was always regarded as a walking brain, so to speak." During this period, Kaczynski became so intensely interested in mathematics, spending hours studying and solving advanced problems, he became associated with a group of like-minded boys interested in science and mathematics, known as the Briefcase Boys, for their penchant for carrying briefcases. One member of this group called Kaczynski as the smartest kid in the class, just quiet and shy until you got to know him. Once he knew you, he could talk and talk. I can't help but relate to Kaczynski here. I feel like I'm quite similar. I'm a fairly reserved person. I speak when spoken to. Otherwise, I often just keep myself to myself. An awful lot like Kaczynski. The only difference is I have no intention in mailing bombs to people. Let's just make that very clear. Ted graduated at age 15. 15. I mean, he might be ready academically, but there's no way that he is ready socially. He went to Harvard age 16, and as I'm sure you're not surprised, he was not emotionally prepared. And as a sophomore, Kaczynski participated in a study described by an author, Alston Chase, as a purposefully brutalizing psychological experiment, which was led by Harvard psychologist Henry Murray. Subjects were told they would be debating personal philosophy with a fellow student, and were asked to write essays detailing their personal beliefs and aspirations. The essays were turned over to an anonymous attorney, who in a later session would confront and belittle the subject, making vehement, sweeping and personal abusive attacks, using the content of the essays as ammunition, while the lecturers monitored the subject's physiological reactions. These encounters were filmed, and subjects' expressions of anger and rage were later played back to them repeatedly. The experiment lasted 3 years, with someone verbally abusing and humiliating Kaczynski each week. Kaczynski spent 200 hours as a part of the study. Kaczynski's lawyers later attributed his hostility towards mind control techniques to his participation in Murray's study. Some sources have suggested that Murray's experiments were part of the Project MK Ultra, the Central Intelligence Agency's research into mind control. Chase and others have also suggested that this experience may have motivated Kaczynski's criminal activities. Let's fast forward to 1971. Kaczynski has moved to a remote cabin that he had built just outside of Lincoln, Montana. He aimed to live a simple life with little money and without electricity or even running water. It seems like Kaczynski wanted to take us all back to the Stone Age. All he wanted originally was to become self-sufficient. He taught himself survival skills like tracking game, edible plant identification, organic farming and bow drilling. He had a bicycle to get into town when need be, hint, when posting bombs, but also to work as a volunteer at the local library. On a side note, I have to admire that Theodore lived the life that he wanted to live. I also agree with a lot of his manifesto, which we'll get onto later. It isn't a life that I would personally live, but he did what he wanted to do, and he lived by the saying, I don't have to do what I don't want to do. That's what I try to do myself. Theodore struggled. It was difficult. It was an awful lot more difficult than he was expecting. He ended up actually believing that it was impossible to live the complete remote life that he had aimed to be able to. He was in and out of home. Sometimes he'd be living back with his parents and his brother, and he'd work with them too. But after being fired, he went straight back to the remote cabin, the life away from society. And it was then, in 1978, the first bombing. The target was Buckley Christ, a professor of materials engineering at Northwestern University. Suspicious? Christ handed a parcel that was delivered to him to campus police. And Officer Terry Marker opened the package, which subsequently exploded and injured his left hand. It didn't take long for the FBI to get involved. This first one wasn't enough, as it wasn't a federal crime. But it didn't take long for follow-up bombings, and eventually they were targeted at planes. The first attempted bombing of a plane from the Unabomber failed to explode and release smoke, but this was still a federal crime, so just that quickly, the FBI had become involved, and the name was created, Unabomber, standing for University and Airline Bomber. Kaczynski would leave false clues in every bomb he planted, leading the confusion for the FBI. They were hard to believe, but the FBI couldn't take risks as this was such an urgent matter. An extremely smart move, I must say. It took until 1985 for the first serious injury to occur from a Unabomber. John Hauser, a captain in the Air Force, lost 4 fingers and vision in 1 eye. Hugh Scruton, a 38-year-old computer store owner, was killed also in 1985. Another computer store owner. Gary Wright severed his nose and his left arm opening a Unabomber package. From then, he took a 6-year break, and in 1993 he mails David Gellertner, a computer science professor at Yale. He recovered from his injuries but was critically injured at the time, and during the same weekend as that he mailed Charles Epstein from the University of California in San Francisco. He lost several fingers. His final 2 bombings were both murders. Thomas Mosser and Gilbert Brent Murray were the victims. This was followed by a 35,000-word essay titled Industrial Society and Its Future. He claimed that if this was printed into major newspapers, he would stop the bombings. And subsequently, despite the United States' policy not to give in to terrorism, it was published in both the New York Times and the Washington Post. There were more bombings, but these are the ones that I noted to be key. You are welcome to go on the Wikipedia page, and there's a table with every single bombing that the Unabomber was responsible for. It's time to look at the Unabomber's manifesto. Here is all you need to know about it. It was written on a typewriter. He puts many words in capitals as a mean of emphasis. He always refers to himself as we, or FC, which stands for Freedom Club. Despite the we and FC, it was only believed that he worked on his own at all times. There is absolutely zero evidence suggesting that anyone worked with him. It contains irregular spelling and hyphenation. The essay itself contained contents describing how tech has had a destabilizing effect on society and has made life unfulfilling. He called for a return to wild nature and felt it was not too late for humanity, and that they could be saved. Kaczynski argues that the erosion of human freedom is a natural product of industrial society because the system has to regulate human behaviour closely in order to function. And that reform of the system is impossible, as changes large enough to make a lasting difference in favour of freedom would not be initiated, because it would be realised that they would be gravely disrupt the system. However, he states that the system has not yet fully achieved control over human behaviour, and is currently engaged in a desperate struggle to overcome certain problems that threaten its survival. He predicts that if the system succeeds in acquiring sufficient control over human behaviour quickly enough, it will probably survive. Otherwise, it will break down, and that the issue will most likely to be resolved within the next several decades, say 40 to 100 years. Kaczynski therefore states that the task of those who oppose industrial society is to promote social stress and instability, and to propagate an ideology that opposes technology, one that offers the counter-ideal of nature in order to gain enthusiastic support. Thus, when industrial society is sufficiently unstable, a revolution against technology may be possible. The reaction to this was fairly positive. Many described it as a work of genius, and I must say, Kaczynski comes across as an extremely clever man, but also many described it as a work of a madman. And again, I can't disagree. I think an awful lot of the stuff he says is a bit crazy, and it's the work of a bit of an insane man. But this man was a genius. I will stand by that all the way. And an awful lot of the work and things that he said were the kind of things someone would say that have thought everything through for a long, long time. He believed in a way of living, and I think he should have just stuck to that. He didn't need to kill people, he didn't need to injure people. He could have just gone with it. And maybe there were other ways of getting people to know the way that he was living. And I must also think that if he was doing this today, he wouldn't need to have killed people. He would have had social media. So how was this man caught? How do you catch a twisted genius who aspires to be the perfect anonymous killer, who builds untraceable bombs and delivers them to random targets, who leaves false clues to throw off authorities, who lives like a recluse in the mountains of Montana and tells no one of his secret crimes? Well, he came to the attention of the FBI in 1978. The task force grew to more than 150 full-time investigators, analysts, and others. They felt confident that the Unabomber had been raised in Chicago and later lived in Salt Lake City and San Francisco areas. This turned out to be true. His occupation proved more elusive, with theories ranging from aircraft mechanic to scientist. Even the gender was not certain, although investigators believed the bomber was most likely male, and they were correct. But they actually did investigate several female suspects. The credit has to go to James R. Fitzgerald. The FBI claimed that the essay itself was the biggest break of all, and maybe it was, but if it wasn't for the work of Fitz, then the name Ted Kaczynski may have never been brought to the table. His effort that led to him pretty much losing his role in the case resulted in the arrest and conviction of Kaczynski. His work with linguistic skills to work out that Ted would be a complete suspect was brilliant. Fitz himself recalls how the transposition of verbs in the manifesto written by the Unabomber helped lead to the closer identification of Ted Kaczynski in 1996. He used the phrase, "You can't eat your cake and have it too." The usual form, which is you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like most people, Fitz had simply believed that Kaczynski made a mistake. But after examination of other letters by him contained a similar feature that were provided by his brother, David, Fitz says it's actually a traditional Middle English way of using the term. He technically had it right, and the rest of us all had it wrong. It was one of the big clues that allowed us to make the rest of the comparison and submit a report to the judge who signed off the search warrant. This unique work had not been seen before to gain a search warrant, but it worked. An awful lot of this is thanks to his brother David. David brought this information to Fitz, and that was what helped bring down Ted. And I understand that must have been really difficult for David. I'm sure at this point he was convinced that his brother was the Unabomber, but by handing this stuff over to the FBI, it meant giving up blood, and I can't imagine anything more difficult. On April 3rd, 1996, investigators arrested Kaczynski and combed his cabin. There, they found a wealth of bomb components, 40,000 handwritten journal pages that included bomb-making experiments and descriptions of Unabomber crimes, and one live bomb, ready for mailing. Remember how Kaczynski was going to stop the attacks? Well, why was there a live bomb there? He lied, and that surprised me. It seemed very unlike him. He seemed to be a man of his word. Kaczynski's reign of terror was finally over. His new home, following his guilty plea in January 1998, after he had, technically, wanted to be deemed insane, was an isolated cell in Supermax prison in Colorado. Kaczynski knew that he could beat the system. He wanted to plead insanity, and he knew that he'd be deemed insane. But, due to what may have actually been ineffective assistance of counsel, his lawyer went against him, and he was led into a guilty plea that he actually did not want. There was definitely something dodgy going on there, but at the end of the day, this was a serial killer of such. He bombed and he killed many people, and he deserves to be in prison for the rest of his life. I can't argue with that. Many people have written to Kaczynski. Some have heard back from him. Not many. But I encourage you, if you find this interesting, go for it. You never know. I must also recommend the show on Netflix, Manhunt, Unabomber. This is a remarkable TV show, and one that I watched all in one day. It's put into a drama. This isn't a documentary. This is the true story of the Unabomber, and Fitz, the agent who tracked him down. On a final note, I really think that in this modern day, Ted's crimes wouldn't go a second without being found. It was only the fact that it was in the 1970s and 80s and 90s that he was caught. With the way things are today, he wouldn't have lasted a second. And I genuinely believe if he was let out today, he'd just go on with his life. He wouldn't commit any more crime. He's just a really interesting person with some really interesting views, with a slightly dark side. Thank you for listening to episode 3 of Criminal Genius. Feel free to give us a like, feel free to subscribe, and there'll be a new episode up next week. Thank you for listening.